Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Elliot walked into his country home on Wednesday mid-morning, the first time since Sunday. He had only come to grab a few things before leaving again, expecting his wife, Laura, to be at work. As he entered the kitchen to make coffee, he noticed the handcuffs and strip of duct tape still on the table, where he had left them. The kitchen towel lay where he'd tossed it after wiping his face. The video camera was still mounted on its tripod next to the table, and the chair he had knocked over was still on the floor. Instead of making coffee, he opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of Diet Coke. "Where the hell have you been?" Laura asked angrily as she walked into the kitchen. Elliot didn't answer, his eyes vacant. He walked past her into the bedroom to gather some clothes, but she grabbed his arm. "I asked you a question," she said, her anger rising. Elliot stopped, turned to face her. His expression was hollow, eyes dull and lifeless. "Let me go," he said quietly. Laura released his arm, letting him pass. She picked up the handcuffs, duct tape, and towel, then walked to the trash can and tossed them in. She unscrewed the camcorder from the tripod, setting the camera on the table before folding the tripod and placing it beside her. She headed for the bedroom, where Elliot was packing a large suitcase. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I'm packing," he replied, not looking up. "Another business trip?" she sneered.
No.
"Then where are you going?" she pressed. Elliot stopped and looked at her, his face still expressionless. "What does it matter?" he asked. Laura's frustration deepened. "You're my husband. I have a right to know." "You gave up that right last Sunday afternoon," Elliot replied coldly. He finished packing a few more items, closed the suitcase, and carried it into the living room, setting it by the door. Then he turned toward the study. Laura followed. Elliot gathered some papers from the desk, placing them into his briefcase before closing it. He then packed his laptop and power cord into a computer bag. Walking over to the kitchen table, he picked up the video camera, opening it to find the SD card still in place. "Is this what you recorded on Sunday?" Elliot asked, his voice flat. Laura smiled. "A souvenir of your payback." "Very thoughtful, thank you." Elliot remained unmoved, still impassive. "Elliot, damn it, talk to me," Laura shouted. Elliot's expression flickered for a moment, and he finally spoke, his voice low. "What have you done to me? Why are you leaving?" she asked. "Laura, sit at the table with me," Elliot replied. He opened his computer bag, placed the laptop on the table, and sat down in front of it, gesturing for Laura to sit next to him. Once she was seated, he inserted the SD card into the laptop. "Let's have a look at this, then we'll talk," he said. The video started playing. It showed a chair pushed away from the kitchen table on the right and an empty table on the left. The camera shifted, and Laura's voice could be heard. "Welcome home, baby. Come into the kitchen. I've got a surprise for you, just like I promised on the phone." Elliot appeared on screen, smiling. Laura walked up to him, dressed in a short, thin robe, her hair and makeup perfect. She was barefoot and holding handcuffs, smiling. "Sit down in the chair," she said. Elliot sat, smiling back at her. Laura crouched behind him to cuff his wrists, the robe falling open and revealing nothing underneath. She slipped one wrist into the cuff, threaded the chain through the back of the chair, and secured the other wrist. Stepping out of the frame, she returned a moment later, covering his mouth with duct tape. Elliot's smile remained even with the tape on. Laura stood in front of him, dropping her robe to the floor. Elliot's eyes widened with excitement. "Are you ready for your surprise?" she asked, smiling. Elliot nodded eagerly. "We ready?" A moment later, footsteps were heard approaching. Elliot turned his head as a man, dressed in Elliot's robe, entered the room. Elliot's smile vanished, replaced by shock. "Honey, you remember Evan from my work, don't you?" Laura said, walking over to Evan. She untied the robe's belt, pulling it off his shoulders and tossing it into Elliot's lap. Evan was naked underneath. Elliot stopped the video and turned to look at Laura. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You know exactly why," Laura replied calmly. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about," Elliot said, his voice cold. "Before we got married, I told you I'd do this," Laura continued, her voice steady. Elliot was confused. "What does that mean?" Laura met his gaze. "I told you that if you ever cheated on me, I'd sleep with you in revenge, and I'd do it right in front of you. Do you remember that?" Laura asked, her voice steady. "Is this what it's all about? This is your payback. I promised it, and I delivered." Elliot stared at her, confused and hurt. "You think I cheated on you?" "I know you cheated on me," she snapped. Elliot shook his head in disbelief. "Okay, I'll ask. When did I ever cheat on you?" Laura didn't flinch. "Don't try that with me, Elliot. You know exactly when, where, and with whom. Elliot pulled the SD card from the laptop and dropped it into his bag. He closed the laptop, slipped it into his briefcase, and zipped it up. He turned to face her, frustration rising. Either tell me what the hell you're talking about, or I'm leaving right now. Laura stood her ground, not backing down. Okay, don't play innocent. While you were on your so-called business trip last week, I got a call from Jerry's wife, Jill. She told me you and Jerry spent the whole week in bed with a couple of women. Elliot's eyes narrowed. Jill told you that? She did. What proof did she give you? Cut the poor victim act, Elliot. You know what you did. Elliot's anger flared. So, you retaliated by sleeping with me in front of me, based on a phone call from someone I trust? Yeah, Laura admitted flatly. I did it based on her word alone. No actual proof. And I didn't need any. Elliot's voice grew colder. You handcuffed me and slept with a man in front of me, humiliated me. All based on someone's word? Payback. That's what this is. Exactly, Laura replied, unbothered. We're even now. Elliot shook his head, still trying to make sense of it. You didn't even talk to me about it. You just decided I was guilty and punished me. Laura was quiet. Yes, she said finally, coldly. Now we're even. Elliot was still upset. Not that it matters now, but there are a couple of things I'd like to say. Go ahead, Laura said, her tone sharp. I was at a conference all last week. Jerry wasn't even there. He got fired from the band 2 months ago for having an affair with the receptionist. I haven't seen or heard from him since. I was a speaker at that conference. I was on stage from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, and the whole week was videotaped. After the sessions, the group met until midnight to discuss the next day. I have multiple witnesses to confirm my whereabouts. I never left the hotel until I went to the airport after the conference ended. Laura looked unconvinced. So you deny it completely? Of course I do. And you have a phone call from someone who wasn't even there. Is that really proof? Elliot's voice was thick with disbelief. Sounds like a pretty lousy case to me. But you know what? I believe her, not you. What we believe doesn't make it a fact, Elliot said. I believed I was married to the most wonderful, loving woman in the world. What I learned on Sunday is that I'm married to a flawed, bitter woman who thinks so little of me that she physically and emotionally humiliated me, without any actual evidence of wrongdoing. Laura said nothing. Elliot stood up. I'm leaving now. You'll hear from my attorney in the next few days. I'm not going to divorce you, Elliot said, his voice steady. That's what this was all about, right? Now we're even, Laura. I didn't cheat on you. Weren't you listening? Laura's eyes narrowed. Of course I listened. You still think what you did was justified. Elliot's expression remained unchanged. I do. Then we have nothing more to discuss, Laura snapped. Just call Jill and find out what evidence she had. I'd really like to know. But honestly, it doesn't matter much right now. Without another word, Elliot turned and walked out of the house. He went to his hotel room, where he burned the video onto 3 DVDs. He had already made an appointment with his attorney and went to the office where he had started the divorce proceedings. He filed for divorce, citing adultery, and handed over a copy of the DVD to his lawyer. The prenuptial agreement would hold up with the evidence from the video. The attorney offered advice on the financial matters that needed immediate attention, and Elliot made sure everything was handled as soon as he left the office. He turned his cell phone to silent mode and, when he returned to his hotel room, checked it. The first call from Laura came about 5 minutes after he left, followed by nothing for 2 hours. Then, the calls came in every 5 minutes or so. Elliot listened to only one voicemail, the first one after the 2-hour gap. Oh my God, Elliot, I finally got through to Jill. She was drunk. Please call me. I made a mistake. Please call me. Elliot deleted all of her calls and voicemails without listening to the rest, then erased her texts and emails. The calls, texts, and emails continued, but Elliot paid no attention. He reviewed the numbers as the calls came in. He also received calls from Laura's father, mother, and sister. He called Derek, her father, back. Hey Derek, it's Elliot, Elliot said calmly. I know who the hell it is. You're not the only one who can read. What the hell did you do to my daughter? Derek's voice was angry. I didn't do anything to her except not return her calls, Elliot replied, keeping his composure. Damn it. She's hysterical. What the hell is going on? Derek, if you want to know what happened, you're going to have to talk to Laura. I'm talking to you. Damn it. Derek shouted. Wasting your time. Talk to her. Elliot remained calm. Did you sleep with someone or something? Talk to Laura, Elliot said firmly. You son of a-hole. I should come over there and kick your butt, Derek threatened. Derek, Listen to me. If you want to know what happened, you're going to have to find out from Laura. I'm not discussing this with you, Mary, or anybody else. Talk to Laura. You a-hole. You really cheated on her, didn't you? Goodbye, Derek, Elliot said before hanging up. Derek called back almost immediately, but Elliot ignored it. Then, Mary, Laura's mother, called. Elliot deleted all their voicemails, then went out for dinner and returned to his room for the night. Thursday morning, he bought a new cell phone but kept his old one as well. He went to his office, took an extended vacation, and gave his contacts his new number, asking them not to share it. Afterward, he rented a small, furnished apartment on the far end of town and signed a 6-month lease. He went to the grocery store for supplies, and by the end of the day, had the apartment set up and organized. On Friday morning, his lawyer called, and Elliot met with him at the courthouse. He signed the divorce papers, and after filing them, was given a copy to serve to Laura. The attorney reminded him that while Laura's copy didn't require a signature, it was important to have an impartial witness when she was served. Elliot called Laura and arranged to meet for lunch at a restaurant they used to frequent. When Laura arrived, Elliot was already sitting at a quiet table in the back. She looked well as she walked toward him, dressed up and carrying a duffel bag. He stood to greet her, and as she tried to kiss him, he turned his cheek instead. It was clear from her expression that this wasn't what she had hoped for. She sat down across from him. Elliot, I made a mistake, Laura said. I want us to put this behind us and move forward. Elliot nodded, but his response was firm. I agree. It's time to move forward. When the waiter, Lynn, came by, Elliot declined her services. Lynn was someone they'd known for a long time. What can I get you to drink? Lynn asked, smiling. 2 Diet Cokes, Laura replied. Lynn left, and Elliot reached out to hand Laura the divorce papers. Laura, these are the divorce papers. Lynn is my witness that you've been served. Laura's face went pale as she looked at the papers. Lynn returned with their drinks, and Laura turned to Elliot, trying to reason with him. Elliot, you said you wanted to put this behind us and move forward. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm moving forward. But Elliot, I made a mistake, she insisted. That's not what I meant, Laura continued, her voice desperate. We've been married for over 7 years. Until Sunday, those were the best years of my life. I've loved you like I've never loved anyone, and I probably never will again. Don't throw that away. We have a great marriage. Elliot's eyes were cold as he responded, his voice steady. It was great, until last Sunday. You ruined it. You ruined everything. Laura, looking confused, pleaded again. I made a mistake. Don't you see that? Elliot looked at her, his expression hardening. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, or when I close my eyes. I see the woman I loved. But now, I see him, having you on the table in front of me, hearing you tell me how much you like it, and how much better he is than I am. That's what I see now, Laura. Not the woman I cared about. You killed her that day. But Elliot, it was all a mistake, Laura pleaded. No, Elliot replied coldly. It was very deliberate. The reason you did it was a mistake, not the act itself. I told you that if you cheated on me, I would have revenge sex in front of you. You knew what would happen, and you even agreed to it. Laura lowered her gaze to the table, ashamed. Yeah, I did it knowing it would never come to that. What did I tell you would happen if you cheated on me? Elliot asked. Laura looked down, unable to meet his eyes. You said you'd divorce me. Elliot handed her a DVD. This is for you. It's a copy of your not cheating moment with Evan. Elliot, it wasn't cheating, it was revenge, Laura defended herself. Lynn returned with their drinks and took their lunch orders, but Elliot didn't break his stare. Laura, sex outside of marriage is adultery, he said flatly. Unless both parties agree to it, it's considered cheating. We can work this out, Elliot. We'll see a therapist, Laura offered, but Elliot shook his head. No, Laura, we can't. You showed me a side of you that destroyed the woman I loved. You killed her, as surely as if you'd ripped out her heart. But instead, you ripped out mine. I don't want a divorce, but I will fight you. Laura's face hardened. I won't accept this. I won't give up on us. Elliot's voice was low and controlled. On Sunday, you showed me a different side of you. I have another side too. You don't want to see it. What other side? She asked, almost sarcastically. The side where I become as vicious, indifferent, and cold as you were that day. I won't use a mistake as an excuse. I will own what I do. You're not like that, Elliot, and you know it. Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you, he retorted. Laura's voice cracked. Damn it, Elliot, this was a mistake. No, Elliot said, his eyes hardening. It was a deliberate act of revenge. What did you tell your parents? Laura hesitated. I told them we had a falling out, that we'd work it out. A fight about what? Elliot pressed. Laura looked down, saying nothing. Laura, what about what? Elliot repeated. I told them you were having an affair, she finally admitted. Elliot's jaw tightened. You never told them the truth? No, Laura responded quietly. Why not? Because they wouldn't understand, she said, looking ashamed. They wouldn't realize it was a mistake. Maybe I'm finally getting it, Elliot said, his voice cold. I know what I did to you is wrong. I based it more on judgment than fact. I know I hurt you deeply, but we can't get past this. We can't rebuild our marriage. We can't put this behind us. Laura's face crumpled. Please, Elliot, we can fix this. Elliot shook his head. The woman I loved is gone. She no longer exists. I'll fight you every step of the way, Laura said, defiant. There's nothing to fight for, Elliot replied. It's over. Don't make me reveal the other side of me. You won't like it. You're bluffing, Laura said, but there was doubt in her voice. Don't push it, Elliot warned. Get a lawyer, have them review the petition, and contact mine if you have any questions. You'll be single, and you can have all the Evan you want in 90 days. Laura stared at him, her anger rising. This has nothing to do with Evan. Elliot softened a little. Sorry, that was rude of me. I apologize, but I'm not leaving you. You already have the settlement. Accept it and move on. No way in hell, she spat, refusing to back down. Lynn came back with their food, and Elliot handed her his credit card. She returned a moment later with a check for Elliot to sign. Elliot signed the papers, then stood up, still untouched by his food. Enjoy your meal, Laura, he said coldly. I lost my appetite last Sunday when you spit on me. With that, Elliot left for his house. On Tuesday, Laura met with her lawyer for the first time. The lawyer, a tough but fair woman recommended by a friend, greeted her. Have a seat, Mrs. Marsh. I'm Troy Barlow. What can I do for you? My husband's trying to divorce me, Laura explained. Has he served you with papers? Troy asked. Yes, last Friday, Laura replied. May I see them? Troy asked. Laura handed over the papers. Troy skimmed the first page. He's citing adultery. Is that true? No, it was a misunderstanding, Laura explained. You had sex with someone other than your husband, correct? Troy asked. Yes, but it was a mistake. Did your husband consent to you having sex with another person? Troy inquired. Not specifically with this person, but he agreed to me having sex in retaliation if he cheated on me. So, your husband cheated, and you had revenge sex? Troy asked, clarifying. Well, yes and no, Laura replied. I did have revenge sex, but then I found out he wasn't cheating on me. Your husband wasn't cheating, but you still had revenge sex? Troy repeated, sounding incredulous. I did, Laura admitted. It's called adultery, Mrs. Marsh, Troy said. But I thought he was cheating, Laura protested. What proof did you have? Troy asked. A friend told me, Laura explained. But apparently my friend was wrong. Finally, someone who sees it was a mistake, Troy said. So, based on what you've told me, you had revenge sex based on hearsay evidence. Does your husband have proof that you had sex with another man? Yes, Laura replied. I handcuffed him to a chair and made him watch. Then it's his word against yours. Is there any real evidence? Troy asked. I videotaped the whole thing, Laura said, pulling out the DVD Elliot had given her. Can I watch it? Troy asked. Laura nodded, and Troy inserted the DVD into the player. After watching only a few minutes, Troy stopped it. I'll need to watch the whole thing, but I can do that later. Let me familiarize myself with the petition first. She began reading the document. After flipping through a few pages, she looked up. I see that you signed a prenuptial agreement, and at first glance, it seems pretty solid, especially concerning adultery. If he changes the wording of the complaint to irreconcilable differences, we can avoid that clause. I suspect that will be a difficult task, though. Even with the prenup, he's offering you considerably more than the law requires. Without it, you would likely be entitled to a significantly larger cash settlement. I don't want a cash payout, Laura replied, nor do I want a divorce. I want my husband back. You told him that? Troy asked. Yes, but he didn't even consider it, Laura said, her voice tinged with frustration. Contested divorces can be very expensive for everyone involved. If we go for counseling, it can't hurt. Then let's do it, Troy said. We can seek counseling and let him know that if he refuses, we'll fight for everything. Do you have any dirt on your husband? Troy asked, shifting the focus. You mean criminal stuff? Laura asked, confused. Anything, Troy clarified. Has he ever hit you or threatened you? No, Laura answered, shaking her head. He's never raised his voice to me. I'll sort through the paperwork carefully, watch the video, and get back to you in a day or two, Troy said, preparing to wrap up the meeting. Does he have a copy of that DVD? Troy asked. Laura nodded in response. It was Wednesday when Troy called her. Mrs. Marsh, he has a pretty solid case. The video you recorded is very damaging, and you don't want any judge to see it. Let's proceed with what we discussed. We're going to offer 6 weeks of family counseling. I'll do whatever it takes, Laura replied. I want my husband back. 2 days later, Elliot's lawyer called him, asking him to come into the office. Elliot went in that afternoon. Elliot, they've requested 6 weeks of couples counseling, the lawyer said. What if I say no? Elliot asked. They'll fight us tooth and nail, the lawyer replied. I'm against it. What do you think? Elliot asked. She hired Troy Barlow. She's one of the best, probably better than me. I'm the very best, Elliot said, his voice firm. I'm ready to fight, teeth and nails if I have to. Then let's just say no and see what happens, the lawyer advised. Keep me posted. That night, Elliot called Laura. Laura, I've given up on counseling. I told you that if you argue with me about it, you'll see another side of me you won't like. Why are you acting like this? Just stop this crazy divorce and come home, Laura pleaded. That's not going to happen. This is your last chance to get off easy. I won't call you again. I'm fighting you, Elliot. I don't want a divorce. Have it your way, Elliot said, ending the call. The following Monday, Laura filed a countersuit on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. She asked for everything. 2 days later, the local school board and the school where Laura worked were served with documents alleging inappropriate relations between 2 married teachers, Laura Marsh and Joseph Cross. Attached to the documents were explicit photos of the 2 of them having sex. The school board held an emergency closed-door meeting and fired both of them the same day. That same day, Evan's wife received a DVD in the mail, along with the names and phone numbers of those featured in the video. After watching it, she called Elliot. Hi, this is Elliot Marsh. Is this Nina Cross? Elliot asked. Yes. Did you send me that DVD? Nina replied. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, but I thought you had a right to know. When was this made? She asked. A week ago Sunday, at my house, Elliot explained. Is that you sitting in the chair? Nina asked, referencing the video. Yes, that's me. And the video's real. It's not edited. Is this woman your wife? Nina asked. For the moment I filed for divorce, Elliot responded. That's all I needed to know, Nina said coldly. I'm sorry to bother you. She hung up, and her next call was to a divorce attorney. The following day, Evan called Laura, reprimanding her for exposing him through her act of revenge, which cost him his job and possibly his marriage. Despite losing her job and receiving Evan's angry call, Laura didn't back down. A week later, still no word from Elliot or his lawyer. Elliot took the next step. Laura's parents and sister received a copy of the DVD. After a brief introduction to the video, they began questioning Laura and reprimanding her. Elliot's old cell phone rang, and he answered his sister's call. How could you, Elliot? Laura loves you, Lila said, sounding concerned. She has a strange way of showing it, Elliot replied. It was revenge sex, for God's sake. She still hasn't told you the truth? Lila pressed. What the hell is the truth? Elliot asked, frustration evident in his voice. Lila, I wasn't having an affair. She got a call from a friend who said I did, and she took it as truth without any proof. This was her revenge, he explained. Elliot, Laura's not that stupid, Lila responded. Well, ask her yourself. Let her know that if she lets the divorce go through and stops fighting it, that's the end of it. If she keeps going, that's just the beginning, Elliot warned. Can't you deal with this? Lila asked. Have you watched the DVD? Elliot retorted. It's just the beginning. That's all I could digest. Lila was silent for a moment before asking, after all of this, ask yourself if your husband is willing to try to reconcile. Would you do that? I will, but I still think you should at least try to work it out. Lila, you've known me since we were kids. You know I'm not a bad guy. Watch the DVD. Okay, I will. Lila hung up the phone. About an hour later, she called back. Oh, Elliot, I'm so sorry. I understand now, but I still need to talk to Laura. Let her know that if she stops fighting the divorce, this will be the end of it. If she fights me, it's only going to get worse. I'll tell her, Elliot said. Lila went to see Laura in person. After confirming Elliot's story, she passed on his warning. Laura remained adamant in her refusal. Lila then told Laura's parents about what had happened and how Elliot insisted she drop the countersuit. That evening, Laura's parents visited her and received copies of both documents. Derek, a family friend who was a lawyer, reviewed the documents and the prenup. His recommendation was that Laura do exactly what Elliot suggested and quietly take the matter to divorce court. But Laura still refused to relent. A week passed without any word from his lawyer, and Elliot took the next step. Laura taught Sunday school at the same church her parents attended. That Sunday, every member of the Women's Auxiliary and the church ministers received a flyer in the mail, featuring pictures of Laura having sex with a man who was not her husband. The caption read, "Should this woman be teaching your children on Sunday?" After the service, Laura's parents were treated like pariahs rather than parishioners. The pastor took them aside for a private conversation and explained the situation. He also gave them a letter for Laura, informing them that her services would no longer be needed or welcomed at the church. A copy of the flyer was included when Laura received it. She cried but still refused to drop her counterclaim. Laura explained to her lawyer that sharing the video with her family was not a crime, as it was clear from the DVD where she had told Elliot she made it for him and that, since it was his property, he could share it with any adult he wanted. The flyers had been sent out anonymously, and without a thorough investigation, they could not be traced back to Elliot. Troy advised Laura to drop her countersuit. Her family begged her to let it go, as it was now affecting their lives. Derek called Elliot to express his concerns, but Elliot stuck to his demands. Still, Laura refused to relent. A few days later, Laura's neighbors and their friends received similar flyers, this time signed only with her name and contact information. Laura's phone and email were bombarded with nuisance calls and messages. Trash was dumped on her car, driveway, and lawn. Elliot waited another week before posting on her social media accounts. It began with innuendos, then escalated to photos with strategically placed blackouts covering all the right places. A few days later, Laura received an email from a porn site thanking her for the video. When a news crew showed up at her door, Laura finally called her lawyer and withdrew the countersuit. She requested a meeting with Elliot, which he agreed to, on the condition that it be held at his attorney's office. They met a few days later. Laura looked like a shadow of her former self. She had lost weight and appeared sleep-deprived. Elliot sat down across from her. "I've dropped the countersuit," he said. "You won." "No, Laura. I lost. I lost the woman I loved. I lost my marriage. I lost everything that was important to me." "There's a side of you I've never seen before," Elliot admitted. "I'm sorry you had to see it," Laura responded softly. "I don't know what to say. I can't show my face anywhere. I'd have to leave just to get a job. I can't stay here either. Everyone we've ever known treats me like a leper," she said, her voice trembling. "We've both lost everything, haven't we?" "Yes, Laura, we did," Elliot said, his eyes welling with tears. "I know it's too late now, but is there anything I can do to undo what I've done? Besides figuring out how to turn back time?" she asked. "Yes, besides that," he said softly. "I don't think so," Laura replied quietly. Elliot stood up, preparing to leave. She stood as well and opened her arms for one last hug. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she reached out to him. Elliot took a step toward her, then stopped. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Tears fell down his own cheeks. "I can't, Laura. I'd feel like I was cheating on the woman I loved," he said, his voice cracking. He stood for a moment, gazing at her, then turned and headed for the door. When his hand touched the door handle, he stopped and turned back to her. "There's one thing that might help," he said quietly. "What's that?" Laura asked. "Just once, you could say I'm sorry." "Just once," Elliot said, his voice breaking. Then, with one last look, he walked out of the office and out of her life. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.